The bhola cyclone of 1970 is remembered as one of the deadliest natural disasters in human history. This catastrophic storm struck the low-lying coastal areas of what was then East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, with devastating consequences. In the weeks leading up to the cyclone, no one could have predicted the scale of destruction that was about to unfold. This storm would forever change the way the region and the world viewed the threat of cyclones in this vulnerable part of the globe. The story of the bhola cyclone begins with the unique geography of Bangladesh. The country is crisscrossed by rivers and bordered by the Bay of Bengal, making it one of the most fertile yet disaster-prone regions in the world. Its flat and low-lying terrain, combined with a population heavily concentrated near the coast, makes it a target for devastating cyclones. During the late 1960s and early 1970s, infrastructure in the region was extremely underdeveloped. Early warning systems were almost non-existent, and the vast majority of the population lived in poorly built homes that offered little to no protection from extreme weather. The vulnerability of the population to cyclones was exacerbated by a lack of awareness and preparedness. Most people in the region relied on traditional knowledge or informal community warnings to determine whether a storm was coming. Unfortunately, in 1970, even these informal networks failed to provide the necessary warnings. Many communities remained unaware of the growing danger until it was far too late to evacuate to safer areas. Adding to the vulnerability was the political context of the time. East Pakistan was struggling under neglectful governance by the central authorities in West Pakistan, leading to significant disparities in resource allocation and disaster management infrastructure. This lack of investment in coastal defenses, emergency shelters, and public awareness campaigns created the perfect conditions for a large-scale human tragedy. By the time the storm began forming over the Bay of Bengal on November 8, 1970, the elements were already stacked against the people of coastal Bangladesh. The warm waters of the bay provided the energy needed to fuel the storm, while the atmospheric conditions allowed it to intensify quickly. As the cyclone grew in strength, it set its sights on one of the most densely populated and vulnerable regions in the world. As the bhola cyclone gained strength in the Bay of Bengal during early November of 1970, meteorologists observed the storm with increasing concern. The cyclone's formation was fueled by a dangerous combination of natural factors: warm ocean waters, low atmospheric pressure, and high levels of humidity in the air. These conditions created the perfect environment for the cyclone to rapidly intensify, transforming it into a deadly force. By November 11th, the storm had developed into a Category 3 cyclone, with wind speeds reaching up to 120 kilometers per hour. Despite the growing severity of the storm, communication systems at the time were woefully inadequate. The meteorological agencies monitoring the cyclone faced significant challenges in issuing timely warnings. Advanced tracking technology like satellites was still in its infancy, and many remote areas had no access to radio or other forms of communication. This lack of reliable information made it nearly impossible for officials to warn the population effectively. As the storm approached the coastline, most residents remained unaware of the scale of the danger. The geography of the Bay of Bengal played a critical role in amplifying the storm's impact. The bay's funnel shape naturally directs storm surges toward the coastline, intensifying the force of the water as it nears land. When the bhola cyclone approached landfall, it pushed an enormous wall of water ahead of it. This storm surge, estimated to be as high as 10 meters, struck the coastal areas of East Pakistan with overwhelming power, inundating entire villages and leaving little chance for survival. On November 12, 1970, the cyclone made landfall near the Meghna River Delta, unleashing its full fury on the densely populated coastline. The storm surge swept through the low-lying islands and coastal plains, submerging vast areas underwater. The combination of powerful winds, relentless rain, and the massive surge created conditions that were impossible to escape. Families in the path of the storm sought refuge wherever they could, on rooftops, in trees, or clinging to debris, but many were overcome by the rising waters. In the immediate aftermath of the cyclone's landfall, the extent of the devastation was difficult to grasp. Entire communities were wiped off the map, and the few survivors who emerged described scenes of utter chaos and destruction. The storm had struck at night, further complicating rescue efforts, and leaving survivors disoriented and terrified as they tried to comprehend the scale of the disaster. In the days following the bhola cyclone's landfall on November 12, 1970, the scale of the disaster began to emerge. revealing the immense toll it had taken on human life and the region's infrastructure. Reports trickled in from isolated areas, painting a grim picture of destruction and despair. Entire villages were submerged, and survivors were left clinging to life in an unrecognizable landscape. The storm's aftermath exposed not only the physical devastation, but also the harrowing challenges faced by the government and international aid organizations attempting to respond. The cyclone's impact was most severe in the coastal islands and the low-lying delta regions. These areas, densely populated and with little elevation to provide protection, bore the brunt of the storm. An estimated 400,000 people lost their lives, and millions more were left homeless. The sheer scale of the disaster made it one of the deadliest cyclones in recorded history. Survivors described scenes of unimaginable loss, family members swept away by the surge, entire villages flattened by the wind, and bodies strewn across the flooded landscape. One of the most devastating aspects of the cyclone was the breakdown of essential services in its wake. Clean drinking water became nearly impossible to find, as saltwater contamination had infiltrated wells and other freshwater sources. Food supplies were similarly destroyed, with crops submerged under floodwaters and livestock swept away. This created an immediate humanitarian crisis, as survivors faced starvation and disease in the days following the storm. Efforts to bring relief to the affected areas were hampered by the lack of infrastructure and the chaotic conditions. Roads and bridges were destroyed, making it nearly impossible for aid to reach those in need. The few boats available were often insufficient for the task of navigating the flooded areas, and air transport was limited. Relief workers faced monumental challenges as they attempted to deliver food, water, and medical supplies to the survivors scattered across the devastated region. Compounding the crisis was the slow response from the government. At the time, East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, was part of a politically unstable country with a central government based in West Pakistan, more than 1,000 miles away. The geographical distance, combined with political tensions between the two regions, delayed relief efforts and left many survivors feeling abandoned. The lack of immediate action fueled resentment among the affected population and would later play a significant role in the political movements that led to Bangladesh's independence. The environmental toll of the cyclone was equally staggering. Fertile farmland, the lifeblood of many coastal communities, was rendered useless by saltwater intrusion. The flooding disrupted ecosystems, and it would take years for the land to recover fully. The economic devastation was profound, as thousands of families who depended on fishing, farming, and small-scale trade lost their livelihoods overnight. While the world eventually came to learn of the tragedy, the initial international response was slow. News of the cyclone spread gradually, as communication lines were down, and reports took days to reach the global community. When aid finally began to arrive, it was clear that the needs far outweighed the resources available. The devastation caused by the bhola cyclone became a haunting reminder of the vulnerability of coastal communities and the urgent need for better disaster preparedness. In the years following the catastrophic bhola cyclone of November 1970, the event became a turning point for both Bangladesh and the global approach to disaster management. The cyclone's unprecedented scale of destruction and loss of life prompted critical changes in how governments, organizations, and individuals prepare for and respond to natural disasters. Its legacy continues to shape policies and awareness to this day. One of the most significant outcomes of the Ebola cyclone was the heightened global focus on the importance of disaster preparedness. The tragedy highlighted glaring deficiencies in early warning systems and infrastructure. At the time, warnings for the cyclone were issued, but they failed to reach the vast majority of the population due to inadequate communication networks and the absence of a robust public information system. In response, both local and international entities began investing heavily in more effective early warning technologies, aiming to ensure that such a communication failure would not be repeated. For Bangladesh, which gained independence shortly after in 1971, the lessons of the cyclone were deeply embedded in the nation's development priorities. The newly formed government initiated efforts to build cyclone shelters, elevate infrastructure, and establish community-based warning systems. Over the following decades, thousands of multi-purpose cyclone shelters were constructed across the coastal regions, designed to provide refuge for large populations during future storms. Roads and embankments were also improved to offer better access and resilience against flooding. The bhola cyclone also played a crucial role in bringing international attention to the vulnerability of low-lying coastal regions. scientists and policymakers began emphasizing the relationship between climate change and the increasing frequency and intensity of tropical cyclones. While the connection between human activity and global warming was not yet fully understood, in the 1970s, the bhola disaster was an early indicator of the need to address environmental factors in disaster planning. On the human front, the cyclone sparked waves of political and social change within the region. The failure of the central government in West Pakistan to adequately respond to the needs of the affected areas in East Pakistan led to widespread outrage. This perceived neglect fueled the already growing demand for autonomy, culminating in the Bangladesh Liberation War and the country's eventual independence in 1971. The cyclone therefore not only left an indelible mark on the physical landscape, but also served as a catalyst for a monumental shift in the region's political history. Despite these advancements, the memory of the bhola cyclone remains a stark reminder of the immense power of nature and the challenges of safeguarding human life in vulnerable regions. Each anniversary of the disaster serves as an opportunity to reflect on the strides made in disaster management and to acknowledge the ongoing risks faced by coastal communities around the world. Bangladesh itself, while vastly more prepared today, continues to confront new cyclones and rising sea levels, demonstrating the persistent need for vigilance and innovation. The bhola cyclone story is one of immense tragedy, but also of resilience and transformation. The lives lost in November 1970 have left a legacy that has saved countless others by spurring improvements in disaster response and preparedness. This devastating event remains a powerful reminder of the fragility of human life in the face of nature's fury and the enduring importance of learning from the past to build a safer future.